In this video, we follow the composition process of the Well-Tempered Clavier using surviving scores. Calligraphy and proportions are our guiding principles. We will make a copy of the cover and investigate what we encounter in practical and conceptual terms. Quite a few issues are the subject of heated debate. You are asked to choose, take a blue or a red pill. Bach's teaching program can be followed using the calligraphed copies of his pupil Heinrich Nikolaus Gerber, starting in 1724 with the Inventions and ending with the Well-Tempered Clavier a year later. Heinrich's son Ernst Ludwig published a composer's lexicon in 1790. Bach's lemma provides unique background. The collection was composed in a place of discontent, boredom, and lack of instruments. This veiled description of time and place may conceal Bach's one-month prison sentence in 1717. It is possible that Bach composed a first version in such a relatively short period in the Bastille of Weimar. This earliest surviving version now only exists on film. There is a fairly recent scholar edition available. It's worth checking out the source. Penultimate measure has an extra note for the final phrase, which is missing in the scholarly edition. The 24 bars has a two-part proportion. In the second half, the soprano moves in an octave lower register, a calm before the storm that is to come. An opening 4-bar phrase emphasizes two types of intervals, the major third with two whole tone intervals and the minor one whole plus one semitone. Bach may have used the first cello suite as a source of inspiration for the invention of the broken chord motif. The broken style had deep historical roots. The emerging autonomy of instrumental music in the 16th century had soon resulted in collections in every key for plucked instruments. Giacomo Corsanis composed 24 steps and jumps in 1567. Vincenzo Galilei proposed dividing the octave into 12 equal semitones in 1581 and demonstrated that every emotion can be expressed in all major and minor keys, occupying 180 pages of lute tablature in his 1584 book. On the lute, long melodic vocal lines were more suggested than actually sounding. This kind of polyphony made great demands on imagination and notation. Keyboard instruments took over the vocal movements and leading role of the lute, but it took a century before all major and minor keys were commonly explored on these instruments. The harmony of the first prelude changes in units of 1 bar. In this first state, the notation of the second note as a 16th is noticeable. Ferruccio Busoni would make a great effort at the end of the 19th century to document the possible writing and playing methods. Bach's first biographer, Nikolaus considered the first state to be the final version, freed from all superfluities. Another state can be found in Wilhelm Friedemann's notebook. Different colors of ink and differently cut feathers indicate that it was worked on 4 different days. The script of the title is in Sebastian's handwriting. We can recognize the copywork of the approximately 10-year-old Friedemann, his fingerprint on the common time, the angular soprano clef, the composition of the quarter note from 3 separate parts that do not connect smoothly, and the inexperienced searching lines of the beams. Sebastian often used a wiping technique for corrections while composing. 3 bars have been scraped away. What is still legible corresponds with the measures of the first state. This was a lesson in composition, where fluities were clumped together by the pillars of creation. Friede witnessed how harmonies began to follow new paths. Not only a lesson in composing, but also in calligraphy. Bach demonstrated Friede how the official shape of a cat's note was written, an angular wave, and his own faster to scribe form. This tension-filled chord that would start on the next page called for a more exciting start of the second melodic phrase. Note font size was reduced for the inserts. For a second edition, the spacious bottom margin was used instead of the empty lower staff. It was a great educational lesson, and even we can enjoy it as if we were there ourselves. It was also a lot to understand, and they called it a day. On a new day with new ink and quill, Bach decided not to continue with the tense cat's chord from the previous session. He replaced it with a smooth transition to the last 3 bars of the second episode, and calligraphed the initial second half unchanged. This pickpocket craftsmanship left fingerprints. The proportions of the prelude were now altered from a regular 4 + 8 + 12 to an irregular 4 + 11 + 12. For playing without page turn and visual overview, a single folio layout could have been useful. But proportions were not set in advance, and the pages document various stages. It is complex to transfer all to see data into a copy. The scholarly edition lacks the custos, cat's notes. Let us consider the question of whether the accompanying fugue had been composed already. Proportions will provide part of the answer. To be a suitable subject for a fugue, it must have certain properties. 15th century artists had explored regularities in art and reality. If you spread your legs so far that your body height is reduced by 1/14, the center of the spread limbs is at the navel. The body, composed of regular proportions, magically can fit into opposite shapes, the square versus the circle. Da Vinci's composing contemporaries stumbled upon the musical equivalent of the Vitruvian Man. The soldier's song L'homme armé, the armed man. The melody of this song proved to lend itself exceptionally well to contrapuntal treatment. Huge quantities of motets for 5 voices were composed on its subject, that also lent itself perfectly to individual characterization. These large-scale pieces had strictly regular divisions into halves, thirds, quarters. The melody starts with a quarter jump and then descends in steps. The motifs of the first fugue are constructed out of these elements. In another guise, we find them in the prelude. You could say that in 16th century broken instrumental style, an ode is paid to 15th century vocal motets with 5 voices and their perfect subject. A typical Baroque addition would be a taste for asymmetrical proportions after centuries of symmetry and components in architecture, gardens, text, music. The connection of prelude and fugue through the armé motifs has an analytical weakness. It is easy to imagine that when Bach first had the idea for these cycles, dozens of fugue subjects immediately came to mind. Most of these fall within the scope of the armed man. Preludes don't give too much away of what's to come, and the specificity of a subject can easily be absorbed into generalities. The step-by-step learning program is a plausible explanation for the absence of the fugue. Bach embellished the letter U in the middle of the title of Prelude 2 with a hair. Its shape is an illustration of some properties of the appearance of his proportions. In 1902, the Thomasschule was demolished. 4 of Friedemann's school notebooks were found. In May 1727, Friede doodled a portrait that emerged in 2 phases from the words "Mein Liebling." Friedemann's first biographer, Martin Falk, calls it comparable to his father's profile. Skilled draughtsman Paul Gülle later made a portrait of the 73-year-old Friedemann from observation, which seems to fit like a Lomarmé melody on a Bach fugue theme. The drawing deserves a place in the line of possible Bach portraits from life. In the search for a real picture of Bach, his body was dug up at the end of the 19th century. Sebastian had lost a lot of weight in the meantime. To compensate a bit for this, a scientific reconstruction has been made based on those bones. The facial expression is a bit unfortunate. From the proportional point of view, the massive jaw stands out. Maybe they accidentally dug up Sebastian's forgotten twin brother, Okerbach. For the hair perspective, we see that in this reconstruction his haircut is short and rather straight, but his scores tells differently. This longer hair has a rather irregular shape, like a coastal outline or the border of a cloud, seemingly more chaotic and random, chance without an organizing principle. Friedemann's notebook contains 11 preludes from the Well-Tempered Clavier. 4 of them are incomplete. Friedemann stopped calligraphing at the end of the right page. They are placed near the front of the book, while the 2-part inventions are in the middle and the 3-part ones conclude. The binding of the first half is a physical sequential whole. The inventions were composed during different final phases of the Well-Tempered Clavier. Before we continue our way to successive stages of the preludes and fugues, we can take a closer look at a very early Bach cantata, composed in 1707 for Conrad Meckbach, whose son Friedemann would become godfather to Friedemann Bach. The cantata still relies heavily on the old motet style with 5 voices. Bach sought and found new ways to create coherence between the individual parts by composing thematic relationships. The 2 lines of the text of the penultimate section were given the form of a prelude and a fugue. The closing chaconne has 8 lines of text. The first letter of each line forms the name Meckbach, a reference or self-reference on a different scale than the audience would have heard. This millennia-old trick was not only playful. Bach would use it frequently when composing collections as a constructive principle, and as an expression of felt nature of coherence in reality. This cover was written by Bernhard Christian Kayser, who copied many Bach scores during the years 1718 till 1730. The neat autograph of the inventions were copied by Heinrich Nikolaus Gerber and Bernhard Christian Kayser. Kayser stands out as the best calligrapher Bach ever had under his tutelage. He made a copy of the Well-Tempered Clavier just before Bach made a final version. The chord that marked the page turn in Friedemann's notebook was replaced again. Bach shortened the second episode by 1 bar, while the third was considerably lengthened. Dual proportionality was marked by a lower position of the opening chord halfway. On 2/3 it appears in an inversion, a rest point in opposition to the tensionful harmonies at its mirror part. 2 proportional dramas are at work. A first irregular one that surprises, and a second one that irregularly shows us where we are. Modulations could confirm the regular template, while irregular-sized episodes could highlight a specific contrapuntal treatment. For the scalability and the total number of bars of the composition, we can go back to the 15th century. Pico della Mirandola gathered everything that could be known into one unifying theory. Let there be light, and there was light. There is a one-to-one relationship between language and creation. Speaking is making. Numbers and letters enable mankind to behave like God. You have the choice to be an animal, or human, or divine. It is Euclidean geometry that defines the worlds. Mirandola's Humanist Manifesto did not receive a warm welcome from the authorities. But genie was out the bottle. The unifying narrative inspired music theorists to explore new territories, fueled by analogies. Athanasius Kircher's enormous output owes its success in no small part to stunning illustrations based on keen observations. The concepts in his 1650 book Universal Music provided Bach with a framework for large-scale divine ordering. For the magic of creation, Bach replaced the letters of the Hebrew alphabet with the German. 9 numbers and 24 letters, together 33 symbols, were at his disposal. The second prelude was 27 bars long in Friedemann's notebook. Kayser's copy was initially expanded to 37 bars. At the spot where 10 new meshes were inserted, we forgot to calligraph half a bar. Out of the box thinking, he added a stroke to the Euclidean rectangle of the sheet. The same ink, quill and hand. At the end of the page, he got into trouble again, but still managed to fiddle the last bar in the bottom margin. Other strips were added. We are present with Bach teaching keyboard, calligraphy and composing. Ink is lighter, a different quill tip, but Kayser's hand does the writing. The free toccata passage was given the indications adagio and allegro. Chords were given an arpeggio sign. The melody became more dramatic. The scraping technique was used for corrections. The last 2 bars now became 3. In general, Bach enlarges the final episode when extending a composition. When Bach gave his sketch of the collection to Kayser to copy, it was accompanied by another sketch. Like the last episode of the second prelude, it has the character of a toccata. In this form, imagination could run without restrictions, and the virtuoso fantasy was adored for its overwhelming freedom. The incomplete draft has the same key as the last part of the collection. The prelude can be seen as an early version of Bach's lengthy chromatic fantasy. Chromatic, all 12 notes of the scale are used. The same notes appear lowered by the flat sign as they are raised by the sharp sign. There is no autograph of this piece, but there are many very different copies. Stylistic features, the freedom of form, dates Kayser's early version to Bach's Weimar period. The first notes of the fugue subject are special. A, B flat, B natural, C, or by their German names A, B, H, C, the letters of Bach's name. The Bycats of Kayser's manuscript is a draft composition that incorporates concepts from the Well-Tempered Clavier. His score also sheds light on another source of inspiration. Ferdinand Fischer's Ariadne Musica, first published in 1705. A collection of preludes and fugues in 22 keys. Minor key pairs were followed by a minor couple a semitone higher. D minor with Dorian signatures follows here on C sharp minor. In Kayser's score we see a similar sequence. The large fourth fugue with its profound opening subject. Is followed by a prelude that eventually would become prelude number 6. Letters can have different meanings depending on the context. F is not a forte sign here, but an abbreviation for finalis, the fundamental note. Bach and Kayser made an harmonic analysis during a keyboard lesson. Many copies have been made of the Well-Tempered Clavier. The bar totals of the pieces would not change after Kayser. An exception was made by Anna Magdalena. Another quill tip and page layout tell that left and right pages were made on different days. When she resumed her work, she continued with the second sheet of her example, the neat copy of her husband. However, this was not where C left off, and she skipped 5 bars. The unique proportions and harmonic progressions of her version are not found in the Bach Society Scholarly edition. The omission has been supplemented. There was a second exception with great impact. It was the basis for the first engraved edition in the 19th century. In 1787, a 16-year-old organist, Gottfried Zwenke, made a copy, adding a new bar to the first prelude to smoothen the harmonic transitions. We will see what Bach would have thought of this by looking at proportions. The first prelude and fugue calligraphed by Bach in 1722. Heinrich Gerber experienced 3 times Bach playing the entire collection during a keyboard lesson. He would have felt the regular alternation between happy and sad keys. On another scale, he would have noticed a grouping in 6, as in the first 6 days of creation. 4 pairs have increasing complexity and tension. The fourth fugue is the first highlight. How did Bach create a one-to-one relationship between instrumental music and words? The fugue subject is described as the oldest Christmas song. He previously used the tune in a Weimar cantata from 1714. Nun komm der Heiden Heiland was a song with a melody from 1524. The original text came from 397 by Ambrose of Milan, whose words were sweet like honey. Bach combined the arrival of the Saviour with the punctuated rhythm that Jean-Baptiste Lully composed for the king to make a grand entrance. The words come naturally to mind to the well-known melody, embedded in a new surrounding. The fugue plays with a memory trick. In the second part of the fugue, a new theme is introduced, which is imprinted in our memory by its frequent repetition. The end of the subject and new beginning are fluid. He is like a brook, pumped Christian Kittel after hearing Bach play at an organ concerto. Gottfried Walther took over that description in his musical dictionary and added that Bach's cousin Nikolaus was the discoverer of the fact that the name Bach contains a melody. What we hear as a surprise at the end of the part is an altered melody from what we have been conditioned to expect. For the first time in the Well-Tempered Clavier, ratios of the intervals spell out the Bach motif. For the third part of the fugue, we can turn to a new source, clues from riddle canons. We encounter a chromatic descending melody, meaning Christ will crown the crucified. Bach had written a cantata in Weimar, in which the opening movement is a chaconne on this subject. You don't need to know the riddle canon or the cantata to experience its significance. The melody is intensely sad. The music is closely connected to language. The instrumental music is a story. The world was created by naming. An artist could create divine order by finding numerical correspondences that expressed coherence and connectedness. Bach applied this to every scale. What ordering can we see in the collection? If we look at the bar numbers for each piece, we experience irregularity, like as in the size of episodes of the first prelude. The collection has 2088 bars in total. Its halves fall into a complex but symmetrical and regular pattern. The bar totals of the preludes and fugues can be arranged in a matrix. There is three-part proportionality. There are quarters. Each six-part regularity is subdivided into a 1 to 2-part subdivision. Those parts were a constructive element for composing. One scale up, new proportions leave their mark. The inventions in the Well-Tempered Clavier form a new matrix. Together they have 3120 bars, which is a numerical representation of the Bach motif. 1 to 2 proportions defines their ties. Inventions and Sinfonias 1 through 8 and the middle section of the prelude and fugues together form a third in bar numbers. A decade later, Bach would use a similar method and the same total number of bars in his first two engraved publications. You can take a blue pill and the matrix will be gone. Happily oblivious, we see the light. Bach reused subjects for very different stories. Numbers can mean anything. Take a red pill and you will encounter the dark side of the matrix. There were several very disturbing glitches. It all starts with a book. In 1934, 3 volumes from the estate of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach surfaced in Michigan, USA. A Bible commentary by Martin Luther and Abraham Kalof. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote commentaries on the commentaries. One passage specifies how music should sound over words. When they sounded the trumpet and sang in unison, a unanimous voice should be heard, as if one hears one voice. Then the house was filled with a cloud. Bach wrote, "This is the true foundation of music." The story could hardly be called a plea for polyphonic music. Music theorists solve this by explaining that Jews are blind and therefore cannot recognize triads. Bach had zero interest in such discussions. But the issue undermined the stature of the text, a first glitch in the matrix. Musicians with perfect pitch singing one-voice music experienced that they ended up with a different final than the one they started with, a second glitch in practical terms. In Kayser's copy, bar 3120 of the Well-Tempered Clavier is followed by the word finish. On the last page of Bach's neat autograph, this ending has been changed to fine. Just another word meaning the same, and the music did sound fine. Credits for the divine ordering are given to God, Soli Deo Gloria. Numerically equal to 29 and the foundation for proportions by JSB. Bach's faith in proportionality had remained fine by fixing nature. What caused the glitch in reality, and how was it solved? We need to go back at the beginning. It was a matter of proportions. Frequencies of intervals do not multiply linearly but exponentially. Each interval, therefore, has its own logarithm table and curve. 7 octaves should, according to our intuition, equal 12/5, but their specific exponential arcs make them come out in audibly different tones. Each interval has its own matrix set, causing asymmetrical sequences of different intervals to transpose the finalis. Polyphony was even more problematic. Multiple individual melodies in harmony do not sound harmonious when they follow their geometric tables. Beating the glitch by reloading reality with a newly coded matrix came with one fundamental loss. Calligraphic proportions rule Bach's spectacular cover. Latin words are set up with a width of 5 quill tips. German words are set up in the current, just 2 quill tips high. The current was extremely suitable, because of its low height, for placing lyrics between music staves. Advanced students were given the autograph to make a copy. Many took over the text. Layout and proportions were more open territory. Quite a few come with pretty star constellations in the upper margin. Bach's embellishments in the negative open space of the title are ignored. Nevertheless, some recent red pill takers consider it to be the code. There are a few solutions to the exponential ratio. An octave could be divided into 12 equal portions, a solution acceptable to the ear. A matrix where all notes are slightly out of phase. This was the price to be able to use all notes. And at a fundamental level, a projected simulation of universality. The curls can be interpreted as intervals from the triad that can be tuned perfectly. As a result, other notes will sound more diabolical. There is no conclusive evidence for the set or sets Bach used. You have to pick your color yourself. Seeing was the key, the tool for analysis and understanding. Athanasius Kircher studied languages and went to Egypt to work on his magnum opus based on his own observations, the deciphering of hieroglyphs. During the 18th century, he was seen as the last Homo universalis and the one who succeeded in deciphering. He considered it as a symbolic script. He got it all wrong. We now know that it is a phonetic script, and that the name of this mother of the sky dome from which everything comes is pronounced not. Kircher wrote about correlations in his universal music, concepts that follow directly from facts. But his hieroglyphic translations turned out to be nothing more than virtuoso fantasy. Which could beg the question, is Bach imprisoned by time-bound concepts? The Age of Enlightenment was bound by Euclidean math. We, on the other hand, tend to qualify this illustration as a fractal, a pattern that repeats itself on every scale and is built up from parts that are similar in shape to the figure itself. Etc. is the final word of the Well-Tempered Clavier, reaching out to infinite scales beyond our view. Let us fast forward 2 decades, when he assembled such a collection again.